And good morning, colleagues. Grateful to see that there's quite a number of people online this morning and joining this webinar. I do realize that for some of you, it's actually school holidays and that you have decided to join us this morning in this particular webinar. As you can see in the run-up through the video, this is quite a controversial and contentious issue at the moment, but we're really looking forward to resolve some issues and to give teachers some hope in how to approach this particular issue and to lead the way forward. Colleagues, just before we start, just a couple of house rules, and that is we're using the webinar function of Zoom this morning, which does not allow you to put on your video or that you'll be heard this morning. And it's just because of the large numbers attending this particular Zoom meeting. And what it will allow you in your question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, you're welcome to pop your questions there, or even in the chat box if you want to make comments. Me as the program director will sort of monitor all these boxes this morning and will guide the questions right at the end. So please do line up your questions. We have allowed sufficient time for discussion and to probe this issue a little bit further. As said, and as you could see through the video, there are quite different opinions on this topic this morning, from very successful stories to actually laying out the foundational problems leading up to coding and best practice in schools, as well as roboticas, etc. as a subject. So this discussion this morning will prove to be very interesting, etc. As you could see, that the Department of Basic Education has already started to roll out the skills curriculum for grades R to 9. And then the main aim of this curriculum is then to equip the learners to contribute to a meaningful and a successful and a changing and transforming society. So we will approach 4 very particular questions this morning to look at what is the end goal of teaching the coding and the robotics on school level, and which foundations are required by industry, universities and other higher education institutions to sufficiently prepare and make the transition between school and those institutions in the world of work. So that was very important for us to also highlight that particular throughput of learners being from grade R right up to university, and you will see that expertise being manifested in our expert panel this morning. And then the whole problem of language and mathematical literacy skills in schools, which are very essential for learn to code. And we will also have a look and probe that particular issue this morning. And then teachers are being trained as we speak, and there is great collaboration between private and the public sector in this regard. So our whole question there would be then, what is needed for schools to successfully teach digital skills? And how can the various sectors further collaborate and contribute to this? Our last question that we'll be probing is that what is the current status of the new curricula and the rollout in schools? And what are the actions then from the Department of Basic Education? And what is the way forward in terms of the discussions that have already taken place? So in order of how our presenters will present this morning, each will be allowed about 10 minutes to actually state their case and their opinions, etc. And you're welcome also then to share perhaps your screen if you have 1 or 2 slides, but just be in communication with us. First of all, our first speaker will then Professor Hussain Suleiman, who is the Acting Director of the School of Information Technology, Head of the Department and Professor in Computer Science at the University of Cape Town, very well versed in digital libraries, ICT for development, African language information retrieval, cultural heritage preservation, internet technology and educational technology. Second on our list is then Emma Dix, who is the founder of the director of CodeSpace, an education institution that specializes in teaching, coding and software development. She's also a social entrepreneur that seeks to bridge the learning divide within the developing world and equip young people with the skills they need actively to participate in the global technology economy. She's also received a number of global acclaims for the work that she's been doing. Third on our panel then is Professor Jean Gqeberha, who's an associate professor in the computing sciences at the Nelson Mandela Gqeberha district in South Africa. He's mainly involved in teaching and research related to programming, but he's been quite involved since 2017 in coordinating the Tangibl Coding project, mainly with the Tangibl Coding app, introducing learners to code without the use of computers. Then lastly, which we're very pleased about, is Jonathan Freese, who is the Chief Educational Specialist at the Department of Basic Education of the Western Cape Government. His responsibility is to ensure effective planning, implementation, support of teacher and subject advisor training and support courses. Specifically, his interest also is digital schools in the Western Cape. So as you can see, colleagues, we really have eminent researchers and expertise in the field, which we can engage with this morning. So please line your questions at the end of this meeting. This will then be concluded by my colleague, Mr. Tsepu Majaki, that will just highlight some important issues from the presentations this morning. So first, very welcome to our panelists, and thank you very much for agreeing to join us to discuss this important issue this morning. And then secondly, again, to our participants this morning, thank you for joining us. It is great to have so many people on board this morning. And then to my colleagues, Ina Smith, who has actually set up this whole webinar, my sincere appreciation. Colleagues, then I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Professor Hussain Suleiman. Hussein, it would be great to hear from you. Over to you, Hussein.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for the invitation to speak. Good morning, colleagues from institutions all over the country. I do have slides, so let me see if I can share this first. Can somebody confirm that they see my slides?
Thank you, Hussein. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Hussain Suleiman from the Department of Computer Science and in the School of IT at the University of Cape Town. And I want to share some perspectives from the higher education sector, but I think I should give you a bit of a disclaimer when I start to say that these are my opinions and not based on any kind of survey of the higher education sector as a whole, but rather based on the experiences of many years of running computer science programs at the University of Cape Town. So I thought that it would be useful in any kind of conversation like this to start off with what Suzanne mentioned as her first question that she once answered. And that is, what is this goal that we are aiming towards? And I separated the goal into two parts. And the first thing I think is, and maybe I'm in some senses talking to people who know all about this, but I thought we should establish a baseline here. And the first part of establishing a baseline is, what is our current changing society? We are in a society where a lot of things are changing because of information technology. And we have some things, I've looked at some fairly classical examples, banks that are basically closing down branches and increasing the number of IT staff they are hiring because they are moving into more of a digital realm. The fact that absolutely anybody can get some kind of a cheap smartphone these days. Some of the physical things that we have been used to in the past, like taxis, are pretty much gone because the model has changed and it is now all extremely technology centric. And I found a picture of a fax machine, this relic from the past, and it is amazing how suddenly fax machines disappeared. Whereas just 10 years ago, maybe you would have said that a fax machine was an essential part of doing business. Other things I thought I should mention here is medicine. Medicine has changed gradually and has probably been one of the first things to start changing, but it is now far more reliant on information technology as we go into the future, and we've seen this during the pandemic as well. Search engines have now become a normal part of life. The internet, This is not something that we think of as special any longer, but it is a major difference in the way in which we work, in the way in which we learn, in the way in which we live as well. Entertainment is a massive industry, and it is driven by technology. And I think we all can appreciate this. And I think this is a picture of a game, but then of course, most people would probably think of something like Netflix as their first examples of entertainment. And then online shopping. I think that we sometimes forget that business drives IT quite a lot as well, because a lot of business needs, just the notion of selling and buying products requires innovation in IT. So these are things that are currently happening in society. And I want to start off here because I know some people might argue that technology is advancing at a rapid pace elsewhere in the world, but not necessarily in South Africa, and that is definitely not true. The second thing that I wanted to note as a baseline here is, what does IT look like in a future world? What is this future world and how is IT shaping it? Well, we've seen examples of some of these things. Self-driving cars. Well, you might argue self-driving cars would not survive South African taxis. But we are going to have self-navigating drones, and this is quite interesting because you could have drones that are going to deliver medicines into rural areas, and this has already been tested on the continent. Virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and machine learning have now become all pervasive in all of the things that we do in society. Some of the more interesting things, 3D printing. There have been very recent efforts to 3D print houses, and this is such a key developmental need of South Africa that if the technology advances to the stage where we can do this, we can rapidly roll this out and actually make this happen here as well. So there's a lot of things happening, and the future world is going to look very different. The question that we have to ask is, who's going to create this future world? Who's actually going to create the technology that we need for the future? And I think that you need a range of different people. You need entrepreneurs, innovators, you need people who can do research. We need people who can build systems and build solutions, build technology. And we need people who can design experiences that interface with people. So there's lots of different people who are going to contribute to this. And in effect, in practice, in industry, you get people with a range of different qualifications who are going to contribute to this. But when you look at this list, you will notice that a lot of the people who work in this tech industry are people who have been trained through some kind of higher education. And this is why higher education really cares about what we are going to produce in order to create that future we envision. So what do we need in higher education? And at a bit of a thumbs up, for programs in computer science, information systems, information technology in the universities in South Africa, we generally need strong math skills. That's number one requirement. And at my institution, we've tried to correlate the math skills of students when they come into the program with their ability to succeed in the program. And we know that this is the most important requirement because we've checked this statistically on an ongoing basis. We also know that strong language and communication skills are important. They are nice to haves. It's nice to have some coding or programming experience, but it's not a requirement because students can catch up with that fairly quickly. It's nice to have an appreciation of technology, and it may be nice to have some appreciation of science, but they're not requirements, and they're not hard requirements in any case. What we don't want is we don't want a whole cohort of students having bad experiences with IT in high school. And I would have to say that fairly often I meet students in their first year who are not signing up for any kind of computing courses because of bad experiences that they had in high school. And this is a bit of a pity. So having said that, we can't just be planning for a future world and looking at how universities are going to train graduates to meet those needs without thinking of context. Context is absolutely critical. And I think that I want to break context down into two parts here. The first is that in the South African environment, transformation is an imperative. We have to think about this. We can't have a segregated education system where if you go to a private school, you learn all about technology. If you go to a public school, you don't. This simply can't continue. Internationally, this has been highlighted by people like Barack Obama, who created a program called Computer Science for All, but the goal of the program was really to get everybody to learn at least some level of computational thinking. and thereby transform the whole society. But the important thing here was for all. This was not just going to be a program where some people should do this, right? And at the same time, very recently in the computing community, we have had movements like the Black in AI community that has said that diversity in the industry is something that really needs to be addressed now, that we need to have a level playing field. And so this is a context we have to keep in mind in everything we talk about. So having said all this, what would I recommend based on the experiences of having taught many generations of students at UCT? I think that we really need to train all students in, and I mean all students as in everybody who goes through the high school, primary school system, we need to train them all in mathematics, in computational thinking, in coding. But the mathematics is very important. The coding is something that you can learn later, but it is very difficult to pick up the mathematics later. And if you don't have a strong background in mathematics, there are lots of things you can't do. And this, I think, is something we don't want to have to deal with. And secondly, we need to train some students in basic computer science where possible. Now, this is a hard problem to solve. We haven't been really successful in doing this. We haven't been able to solve the problem of getting good IT teachers, but this is something we should still attempt to succeed at some point in the future. And my last thought here is, coding is great. We have to do it. It's a math skill, but it's not sufficient. For all of the kinds of things that we want in the future, we need a range of different skills. And we're not just going to get those skills from coding. We're going to get them from coding, but we are probably going to get a lot more of those from strong mathematics language skills that can then be built upon in higher education. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Hussein. Thank you for keeping to the time, and thank you for raising some very important issues. I'm really looking forward to see the response from the colleagues after you. Then next on our line of presentations, please could I then ask Emma to please present.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this panel. And really, everything that I want to say is building on what Hussein has been speaking about. So Hussein has laid the groundwork for why IT skills are so important in our country, and really laid a case for the fact that our economy will flounder if the education system isn't able to coordinate efforts and be able to train young people with the skills that will support the growth of the IT sector. So by brief way of introduction, I run an organization called CodeSpace, and we are really an organization that specializes in teaching IT skills. So one of the first efforts that we make is really looking at how do we allow students in high school, how do we allow them the opportunity to have some interaction with coding and robotics, so that they would then want to go on into IT-related studies after school. And then we've really seen a lot of success in a program where we were working specifically with young Black women. We saw 1 in every 2 of the girls go on into IT-related studies. And I think that speaks a lot to what Hussein was saying about how can we craft these positive experiences that young people are having. And then secondly, I want to speak from the standpoint of an organization, CMODISA, which currently has, so I'm chairing a specific work group inside that organization that's looking to reshore 20% of the work that's currently being outsourced out of the country by organizations here, simply because we do not have sufficient people in the labor force with the skills the tech skills that are needed. So currently there's more than 200,000 open job openings for people with tech skills. And really, if we're able to create an effective pipeline of young people with these skills, we would be able to allow our organizations to reshore some of the spend. And so from this perspective, one's really looking at how, what are some of the initiatives that we can put in place to coordinate the efforts of everyone working in education. So as Hussein was saying around the need for IT skills, here he touched on that we need a range of skills. And how I view this is that when we're talking about IT skills, we need to, we'll see someone going into the workforce. Some of them will be building technology. And that's really, I think of the professional coder, someone who's employed as a software developer, a software engineer. However, there's also people who will be users of technology. So people who are simply using technology in their day-to-day roles to augment what they're able to do. And if they're able to use technology effectively, they're more valuable in the workplace and less likely to be replaceable, which is a current big topic. And then thirdly, so apart from people who are creating technology, using technology, there's those who would manage the creation or the use of technology in the workplace. So here we can really see that one would need a range of different types of tertiary education to prepare people for those different roles. Within this, when one's thinking about how does one look at these skills, because I think so often the narrative focuses in on coding and robotics. And yet we don't perhaps truly understand the breadth of the skill set that's required here. So if one's really saying that we need people to be able to use and evaluate critically, so that's where your critical thinking comes in, as well as create information, media, and technology. That really sets up someone with a useful skill set. However, we're currently in a position where 4 out of 5 primary school students isn't able to read for meaning. And this is an absolutely crucial concern because being able to read is an essential skill for all future learning. And here I would really point everyone towards the work of Nick Spall, who is one of the predominant researchers in this area. And the crucial thing here is that one cannot be teaching coding and robotics to someone who doesn't have the foundational literacies of being able to read and write, count. And so here I would say that we need to be thinking about, although there's clearly the economy needs us to be teaching coding and robotics, we want to keep our economy at the forefront of the global tech industry. I mean, we have these brilliant examples like Amazon Web Services that are right here, keeping us right at the forefront. And yet at the same time, although we then might want to assume that now we need to be teaching coding and robotics to everybody, the issue is that it's a sequenced problem. You cannot give someone coding and robotics if they don't have the foundational skills, literacy skills. Because, I mean, to put it quite simply, in order to, all coders will know that being able to, ask Google a question is probably one of the most essential skills. If you can't read or write, that is completely impossible to use. So, to explain that very simply, that's always an example I go back to. So really here, this puts us in a very, very difficult position as a country, saying that we're actually, although we can see the pressing economic need to be bringing this curriculum into our country, there are many, many schools in which it would be I would like to say, unadvisable to be bringing additional curriculum and detracting from the school's efforts to improve the sort of basic foundational skills upon which everything's going to be built. So really here, my recommendation would be that we must absolutely be putting everything behind our efforts to bring this new curriculum into schools that are achieving these basic skills, and then saying that this puts fire behind everyone to make sure that the schools that are not yet achieving those, that they are able to achieve those basic learning outcomes. In the case of sort of a practical recommendation, my standpoint is that at a primary school level, we should really be focusing on foundational literacies as far as possible, and then making sure that our high schools have the availability of computer labs, even for something as simple as typing speed, and the chance for young people to at least get a glimpse and a taste of the possibility of the tech industry, so that they're able to go on beyond high school into tertiary institutions. So really, my standpoint here is that we're in a crucial moment in our education system. I, for one, am hugely excited. This is the moment that my life's work has been waiting for, and yet I think we need to take a really sober look at how this is implemented, so that we don't entrench further inequality into our education system, and rather make sure that we're able to give people the foundational skills, the best possible foundation during primary and secondary schooling, so that they can go on into our tech industry. Because with this quite broad understanding of the skills that are needed to use technology, to manage technology teams as well as create it, we can be focusing on quite a broad array of skills as students go on into tertiary schooling. I have to admit that I have not been able to follow the questions, but I will hand over back to Susan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you very much for starting to drill down to sort of the real issues out there and starting to highlight them and in a sense confirm already what Hussein has been alluding to. So that is great. Thank you for that. Yes, Emma, please check in the chat box, and people are very active and very responsive. Lots of new ideas and new contacts and new things coming up there. Thank you very much for those colleagues. That's very interesting to monitor as well. I know Jean as well, that he will further drill into sort of the practical of what we're discussing this morning. Jean, please can I just hand over to you? I'm looking forward to your presentation as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I trust you can hear me clearly.
Absolutely.
I've made a little video presentation because I don't trust myself in going over time. So I'm just going to try and get that running for you.
Sure.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about a topic of which I'm very passionate about. I just need to give credit to the YES project, an international collaboration between us, Namibia, Mozambique, and Germany. And they've been supporting the work we've been doing over the past 4 years. I quickly want to give some personal context to what we've been doing since 2017. The Tangibl Coding project started in 2017 as an honours project for Byron Patterson, and the objectives were to exclude expensive equipment, obviously including computers, introduce coding concepts, introduce computational logic exercises, promote software careers, apply sound pedagogical principles, and obviously the kids must have fun. The basic mechanism of the game is that learners are given a challenge on the screen of their device, They pack out some code using physical tokens. Through image recognition, this code is internalized and then executed on the screen, moving a tank to a destination. With tanks, we've reached over 20,000 learners in practical workshops. We've presented some coding tournaments. We found that it's quite easy to train the trainer, whether it's a teacher or a facilitator, and they then go and start coding clubs in their schools or communities, or introduce tanks in technology subjects. And our basic motto is expanding the career horizons of learners. During lockdown last year, we started with the BOATS virtual coding tournaments where learners could play from home. The app BOATS has a further environmental theme for marine pollution and renewable energy. We've had over 1,000 learners participate from nearly 400 schools. Our basic products to empower schools to start their own coding clubs or introduce coding in their curriculum are lesson plans or the school coding kits for tanks as well as for boats. Boats is from grade R to 3, tanks from grade 4 upwards. In February, we presented 4 online Zoom workshops with the theme of Coding Unplugged. The presenters were Kelly Bush, a teacher from Hudson Park Primary, Selvi Makula from Good Work Foundation in Hazy View, Leander Oosthuizen, an IT teacher at Alexander Road, and Keith Gibson, who's been a legend in computer training at schools since the 80s. These workshops were recorded and are available online. I can make the links available afterwards. These online workshops were so popular that we decided to run with physical workshops in 10 cities across South Africa and Namibia, and we had over 200 attendants. In these workshops, the teachers and other educationists were introduced to a wide range of unplugged coding activities, starting with a basic game of hopscotch up to complex loops using unplugged coding. When we talk about coding and robotics in schools, I just want to emphasize some realities that we need to deal with. Software development is definitely one of the scarcest skills in South Africa. And if we do not do something, millions of learners will be unaware of these career choices. This is a list of skills identified for the 4th Industrial Revolution. And you will notice that the vast majority of these skills are directly linked to coding and robotics activities. There's a grave concern regarding the school readiness to implement coding and robotics. Of the 25,000 schools in our country, the last I heard, there were 16,000 who do not have laboratories. The vast majority of teachers are not trained to offer coding and robotics. And then even if schools do have laboratories, most of them don't have adequate technical staff to maintain those laboratories. I think we are all aware of dysfunctional laboratories all across our country. In my travels across the country to the remotest areas, this is a real reality, the fear of missing out. Learners, parents, teachers, headmasters watch the news, read the newspapers, are aware of the 4th Industrial Revolution, but when they look around them and their circumstances and resources, they are very anxious that they will be missing out. The traditional kids coding tools that are often referred to are excellent for those who have the resources to use them. But a Lego Mindstorms robot could cost 7,000 Rand, where the latest Scratch needs a connected laboratory. This excludes the vast majority of schools if we only focus on these kind of tools. For careers like software development or engineering, etc., it is a grave concern that there's a decreasing number of matriculants that get a good maths qualification at the moment. So we need to urgently ask ourselves, how can coding and robotics help in addressing this problem? The reality is that coding and robotics will happen in our schools. So we don't have the choice of saying no, but we do have some options. And regarding these options, I would like to make some suggestions. Very important for me, any implementation of coding and robotics in schools cannot be dependent on computer labs. If we do go that route, we will simply widen the digital divide. This is critical for us to understand. I believe it will be a huge mistake to lengthen the school days. Our teachers and our learners are under pressure, and we cannot afford to make a day an hour or two longer. Looking at the current draft curricula, I would say get rid of some content. We do not need to teach all of what is currently in the curricula. Please keep it fun. If I had my way, I wouldn't even have assessment. The learners need to enjoy coding and robotics and to lay a foundation for them to want to do it one day. Coming back to the problem of a decreasing number of matrics that have maths, I would strongly suggest that any coding and robotics in schools must have a huge emphasis on computational thinking, activities that teach learners to solve problems, simply that. And this does not need computers. There are literally thousands of unplugged coding activities available on the internet. Make those available to teachers and use unplugged coding as much as possible to introduce coding and robotics at school. I mentioned Keith Gibson earlier in my presentation, and I would really recommend that you watch the recorded workshop he presented in February. He is at Collegiate, one of the most resourceful schools in Port Elizabeth, but for the whole year he taught coding and problem solving using pen and paper exercises. So because of COVID, but also at the end out of principle, the learners were not taken into the lab. This is the well-known fox, farmer and chicken example, and he goes into great length in discussing how this little example helps learners to solve problems. But obviously there are many other similar examples that can be used. I would like to end off with two quotes from teachers that attended our workshop. The first one reads, "If possible, if the National Office will buy into this idea of unplugged coding to present coding and robotics to our learners, we will make teachers more positive for the new subject and boost their morale. Learners learn faster if they can play and have fun." The second quote kind of summarizes my general theme that says we need to take teachers from anxiety to hope. Thanks for new innovative ideas and ways to get coding to be fun and making this a reality to the less fortunate, as this sparks a passion in their lives. The learners at my school, their eyes lit up as I speak about coding and robotics, and I see their future to be bright with successful opportunities and growth. You're welcome to contact me afterwards on my email. Thanks. That is from my side, and we can discuss this afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you for your pleas. You can now have a look at the chat boxes. You will see that there are many people agreeing with you and is also pleading for exactly the same sentiments that you are sort of asking here for this morning. So thank you very much for that. Our last speaker then would be then Jonathan Frieza from the Department of Basic Education. So I think it's very appropriate, Jonathan, that you actually step in now. I think a lot has been said and a lot have been questioned and a lot have been asked from the Department of Basic Education. And I think it's most appropriate that you would respond now in terms of the process. There's been a call for comments and in going forward, is the Department of Basic Education still open to consider some of the recommendations and the questions that have come up this morning? Jonathan, over to you if you're ready. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Susan, and thank you for the opportunity. And wow, some very important points. Jean, fantastic. The point that you made, learners learn faster if they can play and have fun. If that is not happening when this curriculum is implemented, then there is something very wrong. And also, the most important people are the teachers, moving them from anxiety to hope. Thank you for that also. Susan, there were so many comments. I will, as I do my presentation, I will refer to some comments by Hussein and Emma as well as Jean. Thank you so much. Coding and robotics, the ultimate aim. Well, in Rwanda, we have the world's first robotics drone port delivering blood and emergency medical supplies. In Ethiopia, we have robots cleaning hospital wards of viruses in under a minute. In Botswana, the drones can detect in the agricultural fields, it can detect the beginning of disease in plants 2 weeks before, and the human eye can do so. And in South Africa, we have the global cutting edge of technology, Mr. Elon Musk and his many companies who he is defining the global cutting edge. If all examples that I mentioned are all 21st century technology, then South Africa's response to that is for our learners, for our societies, is bringing forth the coding and robotics curriculum. And it is actually just an interrelation between the ICTs, engineering, like one of them being electronics, coding, and all those three in the context of 21st century technologies. Some of those been mentioned by Hussein so eloquently earlier on, like your AI and Internet of Things, and I'm not going to go into all of that now. But at the heart of this curriculum are two golden threads that go through this curriculum from grade R. One is computational thinking, and each of the presenters mentioned that computational thinking is absolutely essential. This curriculum has it as a golden thread. And the other is the problem-solving process, which is the engineering design process. So, so far we're in line with what some of the speakers are asking for. And learners will be taught problem-solving. They will do critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communicating effectively, and all about changing skills and developing skills for a changing world. I'm going to just run through so that everybody has an idea of what's been happening since 2017. In 2017, DBE started developing a curriculum known as the Digital Skills Curriculum. That started then. In 2019, during the State of the Nation, Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, he announced the development of the Coding and Robotics Curriculum. By a month later, in March, there was coding and robotics development in foundation, intermediate, and senior phases in Gauteng. It was the first look at transitioning from the digital skills curriculum of 2017 to begin transitioning that into a coding and robotics curriculum. In the senior phase, it was then looked at infusing it into the subject known as technology in senior phase. In 2019, we identified pilot schools. There's 1,000 grade 7 and 200 foundation phase schools. January 2020 was a historic occasion where we saw the development of the curriculum, which included HEIs, unions, NGOs, practicing teachers, TVET colleges, businesses. There was never before in this country such an inclusive development of a curriculum. In lockdown, DBE developed the curriculum further. It was submitted to Lucy and the Council of Education Ministers. And on the 19th of March this year, the Minister of Basic Education signed off for public comment. On that same date was the conclusion of all the provincial task teams for coding and robotics. They concluded the orientation course, which was 40 hours. On the 26th of April, the orientation of teachers has begun, is due to be completed, which is also a 40-hour course, to be completed by the end of May. From implementation to pilot, from pilot implementation, in 2021, foundation phase, 200 schools, and grade 7, 1,000 schools. Next year, we have the pilot for intermediate phase, the same 200 schools, and the grade 8 being high schools will be a different 1,000 schools. In 2023, grade 9, and then the coding and robotics is envisioned as a compulsory standalone subject from 2024. Teacher training, teachers who are present may remember training that you had for implementing OBE was a 5-day orientation course. This is a different attitude taken here now. We have 160 hours. This is outside of the 40 hours of orientation that teachers will be going through soon. We have 160 hours of training, accredited training led by and developed by UNISA. A blended model, face-to-face as well as virtual. The funding, the EU funds a grade 7 to 9 pilot, and the ETGP, CETA, Education and Training Development Practitioner, CETA, they have funded the training for the foundation phase. National, provincial, and district and school committees, they are all in place. District and school committees are in the process of coming into place. How can sectors contribute? HEIs, you need to develop a pre-service teacher training for coding and robotics, as well as in-service development for teachers. Postgrad degrees, like your PhDs, masters, etc., in coding and robotics. NGOs, there are many of them creating a difference in the lives of teachers. Training and support, teacher professional development, kits, creating hubs, maker spaces, and clubs. There's some phenomenal work happening out there. In business, we need you for the partnerships and funding. There are many partnerships that exist already. Those need to be developed and systematized. Media, we need the media to demystify the place of coding and robotics in 21st century, and also to showcase successes and challenges. The media, the very important role that you have to play. Screens in supermarkets, and we can go on. Government departments, science and innovation, the development of expos, Olympiads, talent identification, that is happening. It just needs to be strengthened and then expanded to include learners from all walks of life and economic and social backgrounds. DBE has developed a curriculum and the accredited coding and robotics course. Science centers, exhibits, workshops, public understanding of coding and robotics, letting the public come in, and then of course and supporting expos and Olympiads. I'm going to go past that one. Let's get to some of the challenges. The reality is, as referred to by Emma Dix, that we have a problem with our learners in terms of the maths ability and language ability demonstrated. My question is, learners all over the world are the same. Is this a learner competency issue, or is this a teacher competency issue? And we need to give fundamental support and development to our teachers, because the learners that we have are no different to any other learners in the rest of the world in terms of the ability. Does this mean that they must not learn how to code yet? Hussain Suleiman, you mentioned that coding is nice in the HEI, by the time they get to HEIs, but not a requirement because they can learn it there. Hussain also said that maths must be taught before coding. Now, and then Emma mentioned that that there must be a range of types of tertiary education. That is so important, because I want to respond to what Hussein has said. Coding is nice, but not a requirement. Coding is, in my opinion, coding is absolutely essential. Broad range of coding, because every career that a learner will enter into will involve some form of coding and ICT integration. That is an absolute guarantee. So, and coding is about problem solving. It is about problem solving and is about computational thinking. Our learners need to have the basis for computational thinking, because it's only a small percentage of our learners that get to university level. And those are the ones we'll be working with, the likes of Hussain Suleiman. What about the rest? Emma says we need a range of types of tertiary education. Learners must not only be going for degrees, they must have courses that give them the competencies to be able to do jobs. So in terms of how useful is coding and robotics to language and mathematics competency? Meaningful experience for learners in coding via fun, and this is what Jean has been mentioning. Via fun, project-based approach develops confidence and self-esteem. And we all know a child that is confident with a strong self-esteem is more open to learning. So in coding and robotics, they do develop procedural thinking and writing. They utilize language methodology in shared reading and writing techniques. They learn about 21st century technical literacies and how to write it. So what I'm saying is that language acquisition can be supported in coding and robotics via a fun project-based approach where self-confidence and self-esteem is enriched. Computational thinking, the golden thread that is in this curriculum, has 4 interrelated processes, and these processes happen simultaneously. The learner's ability to decompose, to recognize patterns, to filter out what is necessary to solve a problem, what is not, via abstraction, and then a step-by-step approach to solving that problem, whether it is for developing an algorithm, for coding a machine to do something for us to solve a problem, or whether it is just the steps for making a different solution that solves a problem. It's computational thinking. That has a direct bearing on both language and mathematical acquisition. If we always do what we always did, we will always get what we, that's an old thing. We have to do something differently to get different results. We have to freshen up the space. We have to focus on our teachers, and maybe, just maybe, this coding and robotics can assist in freshening up the education space to bring a whole new spirit, a whole new vision and a positive spirit into education. Jean referred to the challenges and his point about unplugged learning, absolutely vital. If we take the coding and robotics curriculum as is, it's going to be enormously expensive to implement. But if we look at it, just by looking at it differently to get a different result, we can become more inclusive for all schools to be involved in computational thinking. He said there are 16,000 schools that don't have labs, and many of those that do don't even have the necessary technical expertise. So we have to consider those contexts. The current pilot, just so that you're aware, the current pilot calls for schools that have strong management as well as the connectivity. Yes, part of the pilot, every province does have schools that are not connected because we have to test this curriculum in that space. But largely, it does look at schools that have some technology and some expertise in place. So thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you very much for giving your own perspective on sort of all the criticisms that have surfaced this morning. That has been very interesting, and sort of urging us to actually act now and not later, to change the world that we're working in, that we are the game changers, nobody else are the game changers, and we all have a particular part to play in it. So thank you very much for that most informative and refreshing view from the Department of Basic Education. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to ask my colleague Tsepu, perhaps just to give his insights and his points of clarity, if you want to call it that way. Tsepu, can I hand over to you, perhaps just to conclude then the panel discussion? Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations from all panelists. Amartya Sen is a very interesting philosopher who speaks about development as freedom, and he speaks about arrangements that need to be organized in such a way that citizens and society benefit from. And he says that at the top of all of this, it is capacity building. So when we all speak about building capacity, whether it is at basic school level or at higher education level, it shows that in a way we are looking at deliverables and we're saying how can we improve service delivery to society, and in order for us to do that we're saying what tools can be used. So this conversation about robotics and coding to me tells me that we are already looking at ways in which we can speed up the process of service delivery. But also more than that, we are saying that there is a need to capacitate society. When we capacitate our young kids at school level, we are helping them to be able to prepare themselves for service in society using the correct tools. Because when we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, we can't be left behind as a continent and also as a country. Now, I will begin with Hussein. He raises very interesting points. And he talks about the changing society. He says the society is changing so much to the point that our deliverables, whether it is in communication, whether it is in banking and medicine, depends almost entirely now on information technology. And he says there is a need, therefore, to be looking at, for instance, 3D printing that has been used to build houses. I remember looking at a video and I was saying, oh my God, they are building houses so fast because they are using technology. And he's saying, but if that is where we want to go, to what extent are we investing into the skills so that the people who are going to be doing that are able to do that? And then he says, when you are going to higher education, the needs are mathematics. And I think there's language as well, Brother Hussein, that he raises. But he says, coding is not so much a requirement. And he then raises the issues in terms of recommendations that there is a need perhaps to train all the learners at school level in mathematics and computational thinking, and maybe not so much on coding. So he says, let's prioritize those because those are very important. It is important, therefore, to look at Emma, who says, hey, the economy of the country will flounder if the IT skills are not on point, if they are not strong enough. So coding is supposed to promote and encourage learners to follow IT-related career pathways. So therefore, it is necessary to introduce coding at basic school level. I think that's the argument that Emma was making. And she says, there is a very strong necessity to look at the pipeline and the throughput if we are if we are going to be having strong IT-related pathways being followed by learners at higher education and in society. And she says that robotics and coding is but a scratch of a surface in terms of the skill set in this area. So we shouldn't be looking at it as the ultimate. It is just the introduction, it is just the beginning, but it is necessary at basic school level. And I think I had Jin introducing the project, which is practically run in Port Elizabeth. And he says, instead of making an argument about what I think, let me show you what we are already doing. So here's the TANKS program. And this is what we are doing. And he shows the different activities that they are doing. And he says, here we are trying to deal with the realities that are technologically aligned, your fourth industrial revolution. And he says, well, there could be challenges. And the challenges are people are fearing missing out. And he spoke of FOMO. And he says, when people look at TV, when they listen to radio, they are hearing of what other provinces within the same country, what they are doing, and people are fearing that. And he says there is also the cost implication when you are going to be talking about running robotics and coding. So these are the issues he speaks about. But then he says there are a few suggestions here. And the suggestion is that do not depend entirely on the computer lab and do not lengthen the school days. Please trim the content if possible. So these are the practical issues that he raised. And then Jonathan came in and Jonathan says, let us look at the ultimate aim of teaching coding and robotics. It is to assist the learners to be globally relevant and employable. I underlined globally relevant, because if we are going to be competing with the best of the best, we need to be relevant. And he says that coding and robotics is in relation to ICT engineering and coding in context of the 21st century technologies. Today, you give your kid a cell phone. When they give it back to you, you will not know what happened, because they already know to do things that I, as an old guy, am unable to do. So it is necessary, therefore, for my kid who is in Soweto to be able to compete with the kid that is in New York and be able to communicate with them using all of these technologies that are at their disposal. And then he speaks about the timeline of coding and robotics from 2017 to 2021. And he then looks at the challenges. You know, the challenges are immense. And we know that these are contextual challenges in terms of language, in terms of numeracy. And he says, however, these challenges should not stop us from introducing coding and robotics at school level. So I think the arguments are strong. And I think if Amartya Sen was part of this group, he would be saying, I think you are all singing from the same hymn sheet. We just need to be able to say, what is Jonathan saying in agreement to Hussein, and be able to bring all of these recommendations together, because all of us have got our country at heart and we want to see our education going forward. Thank you so much. Susan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tsepo, for wrapping that up very nicely. So colleagues, just to confirm, we will be in touch with the different speakers to get the permission, because that is, we're just following protocol in terms of the sort of intellectual copyrights, etc. But we do hope that we'll be able to share not only the recording, but the slides where there were slides available, and we'll put a nice package together for you. I'm just looking now at the question and answer box. I'm looking at the hands being raised, and I'm looking at the chat box, and it's a very active webinar. So I just think in terms of orderly discussion of all the questions being posed to us, I am going to turn myself to the question and answer box first. I'm going to ask my colleague Ina. I know we are also recording what's going on in the chat box, and I think after this meeting we'll compile a little report, and maybe where we have some contacts, etc. We'll put them together, or some ideas. But if we miss any questions in the chat box, I'll try my utmost best to also turn towards the chat box, because I can see that there's a little bit of a mixture of questions also in the chat box, and not only in the question and answer box as well. But if we miss those questions, please do not worry. We will ask our panelists to answer the questions in the chat box afterwards, and we will circulate that to you. So thank you very much for being so responsive. It is great, very early on a Wednesday morning after a long weekend for some of you and us, that we have people really interested in this topic as such. Right, so I'm going to ask the panel members to please switch on the video cameras so that we can at least be interactive. Some has been good, actually directing their questions. Emma, I see already there from Graham Poole. I just want to see whether I'm at the top of the questions. Yes, I am, not to ensure that I don't get mixed up on this side as well. Let's look at the first one from Graham Poole. How was the coding campus held at UCT conducted in the planning and execution phase? And what was the outcome from the experience to you as a result?
Okay, no, that's a great question. So I think here we need to, I'll give a little bit of context. So essentially what we as CodeSpace did is we worked with the School of IT at UCT to, in pre-COVID times, to utilize the computer labs during the 26 weeks when they're not used during school holidays, and essentially identify learners in grade 10 to grade 12 who have the potential to go on into IT-related studies. So putting, an entrance requirement into those camps, and then giving those learners an opportunity to engage in really high-level coding and robotics curriculum, so that those learners would then feel confident and enthusiastic about enrolling into IT-related subjects. And then we provide sort of a quiet bursary and scholarship support to fuel that motivation, because one of my big things is that we shouldn't sell unobtainable dreams. If we want to make someone excited about studying in these fields, one needs to make sure that that is actually a possible dream. So this is really part of our approach of saying, okay, well, how do we create a funnel? So how do we say, okay, we need to first of all make sure that students have basic foundational skills. It's not something I personally do, it's something I advocate that other people support teachers to teach basic literacies exceptionally well. Then once we've got that in place, how do we now expose learners to, to sort of great primary school level? How do we expose them to coding and robotics and develop an interest? Then for learners that are showing signs that they are going to be able to go on into a university context, how do we engage their interest to sign up for CAT and for IT, which are existing, and this was a fantastic point raised in the questions. These are existing assets that exist in our education system. They might not be perfect. There's many comments on them, yet they exist. And they're underutilized. So how do we enthuse young learners to sign up for those subjects, and then make sure that moves on into higher education? So, or the learners move on into higher education, and then we can intervene at that point and say, okay, well, how do we take learners who are showing interest and showing aptitude? How do we then further support them? Given the fact that it seems unachievable to have every school have a teacher who's able to really teach high level coding and robotics, we can have these centers of excellence, bring students together and support their learning in that way. That's, sorry, I think quite a lengthy answer. So let me
Thank you, Emma. Much appreciated. Jonathan, I think I'm going to turn to you now, and I'm going to pose two particular questions from Mike Chiles. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Sorry, Mike, if it's not. And there's two questions then saying that there are roughly 3 million learners in grades 10 to 12. Have we asked ourselves, why is it that only 100,000 take CAT as a subject and fewer than 30,000 take IT in those grades? And why the numbers are declining? That's question number one. Question number two that Mike is posing is saying that the main reason is funding, as except for one or two provinces. The provincial education departments do not fund the introduction of subjects. So he's asking, CAT and IT are essentially funded by the schools themselves. Very little provision is made for equipment refresh, and so the computers start failing, etc. So the concern is that those schools with pit toilets will not be able to implement coding and robotics, while those who have everything will take it on. The digital divide will become even greater. Jonathan, your perspectives on those two questions, please.
Hi there. I'm based in the province. I do not have a global view of what's happening in other provinces. I'm in the province in the Western Cape where those subjects are funded by the province. So we do have good performance in CAT, but it is a global issue in the country where we have declining learners in IT. And it is exactly what Hussein has been mentioning earlier on, is that for IT, which is high-end programming, we do need the fundamentals of maths to be able to be successful in IT. So it is one of the high-end subjects in the country. And because of our poor performance in maths from primary school level already, and that just puts a strain on grade 10, 11, and 12. So it goes to understand that we're going to have a decline in IT, and it is such an important subject. The other reason may be the curriculum itself, because the IT curriculum is asking for a language known as Adelphi, that globally it is hardly ever used. You can ask Emma Dix at CodeSpace. They do a program at UCT where they transition learners to use the language called Python, transition them away from Adelphi before they can enter the courses at the HEIs. So it's a very complex issue, but for now, because I do not have an adequate global view of what's happening in each province, so I'm unable to give an adequate answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I would like just to move to other questions as well. There's a question about robotics clubs. I did not monitor the chat boxes enough to know whether there was some advice there. Perhaps anybody from the panel that has a quick answer there?
Yes, if I may. Yeah. Yes, robotics clubs. You have the NGOs and small businesses like CodeSpace as an example, and you focus on two things in a robotics club: events and courses. So events will be once-off events, going to a science center, or having an expert coming to visit, or participate in short courses like the basics of Python as a language, or learning how to do Scratch, or learning some basic electronics to solve a problem that you've identified for an expo that you want to enter. So it's events and courses that you need to look at essentially, and then of course your resources that you need. You need a space. Some clubs have a space the size of a passage, a small passage, a 2 meter by 1.5 meter. I've been in a club like that, and there's other clubs that have an entire classroom for space. So in terms of space, then also money, funding, having a funding partner is very important. And then being able to identify in terms of resources, if you have tremendous amounts of money, you can afford the Lego. Most clubs cannot afford the Lego. To state early on that it's 7,000 to 10,000 rand for one Lego kit, whereas there are other options in South Africa, solutions developed by South Africans for South Africans, where you can buy a kit for 600 rand, or you could go unplugged just using tanks. So you need to look at, nothing stops you from starting the club. It's all about your space and your available resources and identifying your events and your courses. You could start that club unplugged and work from there to try to gather resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for offering some simplistic ways in how we can actually start these clubs and what we should use. I just think in terms of our report, after this particular meeting, I see there's a lot of questions, I think of which this robotic club was one of them. And then I see there's some questions about the Lego resources. I think in compiling our report, we will be contacting specific people where we could offer some pointers perhaps for people on this call this morning, just in order just to save a little bit of time and to give everybody at least an opportunity to post the questions and to answer them. So I will not answer them now or indicate that they've been answered as live. I'll just proceed a little bit to questions a little bit more lower down in the questions, etc. Let's see, there's one from Quinton Medis. Are there in BEd students that are being trained in this type of curriculum so that they can be employed to offer the new curriculum? Where can qualified educators be trained or certified in these skills? I'm posing it to the panel. Hussein, do you just want to do perhaps a general remark, and then perhaps anybody else that would like to more specific answers?
Well, I don't have an answer to this because we need somebody from education. I don't know if Jonathan knows more about this.
Sure.
Maybe just an opinion or perspective from my side. The little that I know is that universities are not producing enough teachers even for IT. Last time I heard there were very, very few educational students specializing in IT as a subject. So my gut feeling would be no, but I don't have the facts, but my gut feeling is no.
In terms of that, I must agree that I'm not aware of any HEIs that have developed a qualification for coding and robotics yet. But what I can say, if there are any HEIs here wanting to consider that, remember I mentioned earlier on that there is available the outline of the accredited coding and robotics course that DBE will be utilizing for the training of teachers. That is 160 hours. And DBE is emphasizing in the advocacy that teachers must participate in accredited courses. So the accreditation is there. It means it's available for HEIs and NGOs to utilize. So this is an encouragement to get something to start. So thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jean. I'm scrolling through the actual questions. There's a lot that we can actually answer offline with more direct answers. I'm looking at those that we as a panel can perhaps participate and give more perspectives. And one is from Mario Mare, who says, how do we ensure that we all share our learning across the many possible boundaries and silos of provinces, schools, NGOs, universities, TVETs, etc., etc.? Surely we must collaborate as Team South Africa more than ever before. Any views on that question? Emma, would you like to kick off?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think here it's fascinating to see, you know, how really everyone's coming from the same desire to essentially see the inequality that we have in our country, how we can close that. And, you know, all of the points that I raise about my concerns are really stemming from that that concern of how do we close that gap, since everyone here dedicates their life breath to that purpose. And with such an enormous task at hand, collaboration really is the only way here. And I think here one should really be pointing to someone like Johnny, who has an amazing ability to connect the dots and pull people together across different sectors and say, actually, here's someone doing something, here's someone else, in forums like this to understand what everyone's doing here. And so, for instance, with the TechSit program, essentially what one's trying to do is, you know, reshore 20% of outsourced IT work, and then that would avail R1 billion that one would want to push into 200 organizations. So that's, you know, 5 million per organization, which would alleviate a huge amount of the funding pressure for very lean organizations. And say, how then can those organizations be better aligned, better coordinated, and work together? So I think that's a great example of when you take private companies and align their interests with the education sector and utilize the NGO space and bring all of those organizations together.
Thank you very much. Is there somebody else from the panel that would like to add their views?
Maybe I can add to this, and I'm talking to Jonathan. He's got the closest link to government that can change policy. Imagine if government could look at the BEE scorecards, etc., and give companies points for contributing towards coding and robotics at schools. At the moment, companies are getting points for bursaries at university. But if that policy can be adapted, then companies will be much more available to sponsor all these projects aimed at school kids and just introducing them to coding and robotics. I'm just thinking that incentives on companies' side might help, what Emma said, to get more finance from private sector into this problem.
Thank you, Jean. Anybody else? Right. I will move on to the next question. Very interesting one. I am a special needs educationist. How will robotics benefit these learners? Are there any special programs for them? Panel?
If I may, Susan, thank you so much for that question. In every province for the pilot, there are special schools that are part of the pilot. DBE made sure it is compulsory in every single province that we will be piloting coding and robotics in special schools. And I'm looking very forward to how coding and robotics, the response to that at special schools. I've heard from one teacher, and it's only one. I do not know, I do not have a broad response for you. The one teacher where he's had the most astounding response from learners who he says was functioning way beyond his perceived ability when faced with coding and robotic skills. And I found that absolutely fascinating. I would like to know whether that is actually happening in other special schools. But let's see how this pilot unfolds, and let's look at the possibilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm sorry that I'm sort of poking at you the whole time, but it seems that teachers are really very interested in what's being offered and learning quite a bit this morning. So sorry about that. But there has been a question. You have mentioned the 1,000 schools who, or the 10,000 schools who is part of your initiative. And I assume that is it now for the moment. There's no private organizations or other schools that can actually apply to participate in this initial phase. Are there?
The pilot is a closed pilot. In foundation phase, 200 schools nationally. And in grade 7, 1,000 schools. It's a closed pilot. But what's important is the draft curriculum is available to all. Nothing stops any organization from doing their own pilot. And if you do so, we'll be very happy to learn from your findings as well. Nothing stops any NGO or organization from doing their own pilot on the curriculum, or just trialing it themselves in their own organization or one or two of the schools that they serve. Thank you.
And where can one find, Jonathan, sorry, where can one find this robotics curriculum?
It's 3 documents. One is a foundation phase document, the other is the intermediate phase document, and the third one is the senior phase document, which covers grade 7 to 9. Those are all available on the DBE website. But what I will do, I will email their documents to Ina so that the draft curriculum can be made available to everyone that has participated in the session today.
Can I just make a comment on the pilot schools, please?
Yes, please, Jean. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the Western Cape. So Jonathan, I'm not targeting you now, but I've been traveling through all our provinces with our workshops. And it seems to me that schools think that those that are up and running and have been trained, etc., The most feedback I got from schools is they were identified as pilot schools and that's it. No training, no equipment, no support. So that's the reality on the ground at the moment. Whether it's going to improve later on, I don't know. So I just don't want this perception that the pilot schools are up and running and have been trained, etc. Nothing has happened up till 2 weeks ago. For most schools I met that were pilot schools, unfortunately.
Susan, if I may respond directly to Jean, you're absolutely correct. No school has been trained yet. The first orientation session of schools has started in some provinces on Monday past. That's the first interaction that the Department of Basic Education has had with schools. And over the next month and a half, you'll see technically all schools involved in the pilot should have had their first 40 hours of orientation. That is supposed to happen. So I think let's ask that question again in the middle of June, and then let's see what the response is. But for now, no one has been orientated. No teacher has been orientated in the country. It's the first teachers started on Monday, and in the Western Cape, it hasn't started in this week at all. It's starting more towards the middle of May. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I just want to get to my next question. Sorry, there's so many questions popping in that I seem to lose my place every 5 minutes. I just want to try and keep track to get a spread of questions. Let's just see. There's a comment from Vanessa Willemse that says that these 4 IR skills needs project-based learning to be cemented. CAP's curriculum to condense and focus is on regurgitating knowledge gained, not application of knowledge. Adding coding and robotics to an early bloated curriculum should be examined in more detail. Sorry, Jonathan, it seems that you'll have to answer.
Well, I must agree. I must agree. Project-based learning is absolutely vital and essential to this curriculum. And I must also agree that the CAPS curriculum is bloated with too many competencies, because project-based learning needs the pleasure of time. It's not a takeaway experience. It needs a restaurant experience with nice music playing in the background. So that is the big challenge, is to hand over the space to the professionalism of the teachers, to give the teachers the pleasure of time. So the current draft, Jean has stated earlier on, and I agree with him, the current draft is bloated, but it is a draft that's there, and it's our job to say it's bloated. But we must say what must be removed, so that we can give the teachers the pleasure of time, so that we can still maintain the golden threads of computational thinking and the engineering design process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Then thank you to Linford Molahodi, who has asked this question that almost every presentation indicates 4 IR skills. How do we deliberately and explicitly plan and implement these in the programs? In most programs I've seen, these are only concepts in the background, but there is less to be seen in the implementation. Any of our panelists that would like to start off and just provide us with some direction? Yeah, thank you.
Can I start on that one? I like to be very practical. I'm not a guy that's into policies and all this stuff. I've seen some documents which Keith Gibson has developed, and unfortunately he can't speak now, but he can comment. And I would say a place to start is to draw up just a list of 20 to 30 activities and distribute that to schools and say to the teachers, listen, start playing with your kids, use these activities. Let's start on a very practical base, away from the curriculum, away from policies, and talk to people like Keith Gibson, 2 or 3 other experienced teachers in the country, and ask them, put us together a little manual of activities, and let's distribute it to all the schools. Let's get started from the very basic principle. I know that's not a high-level answer to that question, but I think we need to start very basic.
If I may provide an example, Susan.
Yes, please.
For instance, you have a concept called IoT robotics. Now, what is that? Internet of things, things connected to the internet. What am I actually talking about here now? So introducing that concept, you have a robotics kit, you have a Bluetooth connection to the kit via a phone or a tablet device, and that is Internet of Things. You can take that kit and expand it in a way that you can use that kit to create a plant that waters itself. And with that kit connected to the internet, you can actually water your plant from anywhere in the world, because your device and your cell phone and the plant watering thingy is at home, and you can actually switch it on when you want to. That's Internet of Things. That is an example. But I think that we need to create that space to be in the presence of Keith Gibson, so that we can collaborate and create a bouquet of examples for each of the concepts. Thank you.
Sorry for interruption. Keith has indicated he is available to speak.
Inas, sorry, I think, could you just repeat? Because
sorry,
sorry,
Susan. Keith has indicated that he is available to speak. Keith is available to speak.
Oh, sorry, I'm only getting it right now. Right, let's take Keith. Let's give you an opportunity to respond.
Can everybody hear me there?
Yes, thank you, Keith. Please go ahead.
Right, thanks. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity. I've been involved in the sphere for about 30 odd years, and like the panelists, I'm probably more excited in my teaching career about this than anything else. But it's so important for us to get this right. And where I started is with the very basics. And I'm teaching at a high school, and as Jean has pointed out, a very privileged high school. But the essence of the subject, to get away with all the terminology and the labels, is it's about problem solving. And if we start with problem solving and getting learners to realize that they solve problems every day, and we do, all the subjects will say that they're teaching problem solving, but they're not really, to be honest, to a large extent. And this is the one subject that can, and programming, and that is just an implementation of problem solving. So I've used riddles and puzzles and all sorts of things. I'll be the first to admit I have a brother at a primary school level, so I can bounce ideas off of him. But I'm quite prepared to put resources together that people could use and have feedback from, because obviously pitching it at certain levels, etc. Things like the Computer Olympiad talent search are they're brilliant examples, ranging from. And I've based a lot of my work on that, ranging from right through to the junior grades through to the senior grades. And these kids, and I think just to come in with Jean, is if it's not fun, they're learning problem solving without realizing they're learning problem solving. I don't teach them words like abstraction and this and that until maybe a year or two down the line. And I say, okay, did you see what we did there? Okay, and it's from making a cup of coffee or using a recipe or whatever it happens to be. I think sometimes we jump to the very high-tech type of examples without realizing that we're actually doing that same type of thinking every day in our lives, and we ought to be. And if we can improve the critical thinking and the critical reading and the mathematical skills and the logical skills at that lowest level, I think that's the key. I'd be very careful about rushing into coding. Coding is an implementation of problem solving. I always say to my kids, translating from Spanish into German is not that difficult if you can speak Spanish, but if you can't speak Spanish, it's very difficult. So the problem solving needs to happen first, and in everyday things. I do things like in COVID, for example, the flow of traffic around the school, and would it be best to go upstairs, down? All sorts of things can be done. And it's just a question of imagination, and I'm quite happy to help and share with anything I can do.
Thank you, Keith, for your offerings and for your experience, etc. It does bring sort of quite a practical spin on what we're also talking about this morning. I am going to allow perhaps then Ron and then Lynn to very quickly state perhaps your contribution to this discussion this morning. Ina, are you ready and on standby to give them speaker rights?
Hi, Suzanne. I'm currently at NMU with John. Thank you, John, for your presentation and others. Just to give you an idea of what I'm doing, the Dean asked me to fourth industrialize the curriculum on media and teaching and learning. And I've now put the topic of scratch coding directly into the second year course, and then HTML coding into third year. And yes, I think from my experience, yes, there's a lot of resistance to the concepts that are coming in, because I teach in the township schools and take the same lessons to the students, and the students are up in arms because they're having to think for a change. But yes, we must strive to institutionalize the courses at university to be able to have a major impact on the learners at school, because the teachers that are going out into the classrooms need to be equipped. Yes, they think they're learning coding, but as Keith points out, it's that problem-solving skills, all the other skills that go with it. So yes, I think we need to upgrade from low-level courses to full-on courses in the educational sector to have a major impact, and taking into account things like what Keith is talking about, going unplugged, looking at all the other issues involved, and make a difference at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. Ina, have you assigned some talking rights to Lynn? Lynn, if you can go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Linford.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Linford from the Faculty of Education at UJ. So what we have done since last year, although this has started as something just to alleviate boredom with our students during the lockdown period, and the university has formalized our coding club in June last year. So we offer the coding club for our final year teaching students and the PGCE students, who also receive certificates towards the end of completion. And so far, our coding club certificate lasts for about 14 weeks to 15 weeks. And, you know, many of the competencies that we are talking about, critical thinking, creativity, which is at core. So not just coding, we use coding as a mechanism to achieve this, but we are more driven by the competencies of what we want to achieve and how we want to transform the education system through fun-filled environment. So I will just share a link on which we normally share the work that we do, and our coding clubs runs every Saturday at 8 o'clock until 9 o'clock. It's been running for about 2 years now. And yeah, we keep on continuing with this, and I think we are doing well quite with it. So it's necessary for students from from Faculty of Education students to be part of this, instead of just being released into the education system and then waiting for government to come intervene and help. We can help as institutions of higher learning to prepare these teachers while they are still in our hands, so that we can, you know, try to help out as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linford, for your comments as well. And thank you. We have now 2 comments from higher education institutions about their views. I think that is great. We're getting a nice perspective here of throughput, meaning from primary, secondary, and higher education institutions as well. I'm still monitoring the chat box. There are still quite a lot of comments, and already some of the questions are being answered. I see there's been quite a debate on the Delphi technique. Zuki, I'm not sure if you still need perhaps to to say something about that? Right. I'm not hearing something from Sophia as such.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm from Northwest University, and we have we train IT and CAT teachers. We have got B.Ed courses for IT and CAT, and we also have got PGCE courses for IT and CAT teachers. Yes, so what I would like to say is that we have got a very low intake on potential students for B.Ed IT. So on that question, if there is a lot of teachers out there, no, there definitely is not a lot of teachers. And I think that teachers should also be specifically trained to facilitate coding and technology. It's not just something that you can introduce. There are certain specific active teaching and learning strategies that they should follow. And yes, on the question of Delphi, in the past, there has always been a low intake for the subject IT, and there has been a lot of changes to the programming languages. I think Keith he was part of the process a long time ago when a specific language for the subject was decided on. And the point is that in school, learners should learn good programming concepts, and they should not be programmers when they leave grade 12. In the same manner, we don't expect from life science learners to become doctors when they leave grade 12. So yes, and Delphi was identified as a programming languages with a graphical user interface that is fun to use, that it's easy to use. And although people might argue that it's not much used out there as other programming languages, that is not the point that we should address here. And I think that learners are just scared of the subject because of the difficulty level. And I'm now just wondering, when I'm looking at the robotics curriculum, now we're going the same route here again, and that we really need to very carefully think about what we're trying to achieve with this curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Thank you for your perspectives as well and your input. I'm sure notes are being taken about the concerns being raised, etc. I see that there's quite a couple of questions about teachers who have not been previously exposed to robotics and coding. What is the training opportunities for them specifically, and teachers who want to develop their own skills in going forward? Are there any advice that you can actually offer there? Any ideas?
Maybe not advice. Jonathan will probably know the training for teachers. I think the general message is that if we go the coding unplugged route, the computational thinking route, not much training is needed. But for teachers that want to empower themselves regarding coding as such, there are things on the internet, but Jonathan probably knows better. But I would just like to emphasize the coding unplugged and the computational thinking route, not much training is needed.
Thank you. Jonathan, you want to add?
Yes. Currently, no formal training and education is available. The only course, and it's only currently being offered by UNISA, and only once the training starts, only for the teachers in the pilot. I suppose it's a way of strengthening the design of the course as well, but it doesn't mean that your learning does not happen. I must agree with Jean Kreiling. There's a website called code.org. Amazing stuff there, and many other free. You can look at Scratch. There's many other free ways of doing and learning about coding and robotics. But maybe this conversation needs a session all on its own. CS Unplugged is another, Computer Science Unplugged is another amazing bouquet of resources for people who don't have any equipment. So a lot of self-learning can happen. There are a number of NGOs. So just check in your area. Some NGOs that are highly sophisticated in terms of supporting teachers and very willing to support. Some at a fee and some at no fee at all. Some indulge in cross-subsidization. They get money from those who can pay and they use that money to help those who cannot pay. So do some research, find out about it, but a lot of self-learning can happen. Computational thinking, getting the child to clean their room is a process of computational thinking. Once you read about computational thinking, those words of abstraction and pattern recognition and it sounds complicated, but they are instinctive skills that all of us possess. So once you just realize that the terminology is something that you have done all your life already when you solving everyday simple problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And then a question from Judith asking, sorry, yes, please. Sorry, Emma, please go ahead and do add your...
I can quickly step in. I always love Johnny's perspective, but I can also step in and add that, for instance, I mean, here we have, you know, just on this panel, we have, you know, 2 options already that provide teacher training for, you know, at least 2 different contexts. So for instance, we have Jean's really fantastic resources for, you know, an unplugged low tech for, you know, lower grades context. And then, for instance, the Coding for Schools program that I'm pouring my energy into at the moment, essentially takes introductory courses. I look specifically for, so all of these resources that Johnny is talking about, I look for resources that don't require any specific costs, and where there's no, no IP that's going to bind a school into license fees and so on. So for instance, things like Scratch I really think are brilliant because they're free to schools. And essentially I then provide teachers with teaching resources to use. And really the position that I'm trying to move teachers into is I at the moment like to use the analogy of an air hostess. So, you know, welcome aboard learners. This is the flight to the technologically enabled future. Please find your emergency exits, but we hope they don't want to use those. And really allow teachers to direct learners to resources where they can drive their own learning. And the teacher does not have to be the pilot, the one that has all the knowledge. They simply need to know how to direct the learners and manage them, make sure they don't try to jump out of a window. So that's really a space that we can move into in the immediate future before teachers are trained. At the same time, we can then be training our pre-service and in-service teachers for the medium term. Anyway. Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you.
Susan, can I just come in? I need to join now. Leave now. And I don't like to. I need to go to another meeting. Thank you very much for this panel. I believe you guys can make a huge contribution after today. Thank you for the privilege to being part of it. Thanks.
Thank you for joining. We do appreciate. And until we speak again, Jean, thank you. Have a good day. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you. Right, I am going to pose the last question then, and I think one elephant in the room that we haven't really addressed is that some rural provinces just don't have the computer laboratories to offer IT and CAT. So what plans are available to ensure that schools have the necessary laboratories to offer coding and robotics and IT without then these subjects then without failure? And then just to latch on to that, are there any other experiences of using other devices like cell phones as opposed to computer labs in actually training IT skills and CAT, etc.? Any of the panelists would you like to perhaps jump in and hop in? Thank you.
I'll be happy to hop in there. If you look at the curriculum document, it asks for a computer lab, and that just sets screams inside some contexts, minds saying, how are we going to do this? We just don't have the physical space, all the money to do this. And then the very next question, cell phones. The question about cell phones, that the answer there is, do we really need that lab, or just do we need any space, anywhere, any space? So there are some technologies that are available in this country right now that are developed by South Africans, where you don't need an internet connection to teach robotics and coding. One of the solutions is you provide a device with an app that is downloaded onto it. All that is needed is a Bluetooth connection to the robot, for instance. Let's say a navigational robot. You do not need any physical connection to the internet for that. And there's a number of organizations that do that. Then also there are some organizations that can offer a server at the school and provide an array of research material and exercises and platforms, learning management system platforms. So learners will access that server as if they are accessing the internet, but it's all online and locally based at the school. So they'll be learning the skills that learners who do have access. They'll be learning those skills on the equal footing. So offline labs, there are some solutions available, other high-tech solutions with beaming internet signals from 30 kilometers away to a school. Those solutions are there. So it all depends on the context that the school is at and the kind of connectivity. But as long as there is a device and the appropriate kit, it's possible, very possible, without a lab and without an internet connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Colleagues, to my horror, we've actually come to the end of this webinar. It's already going on to 11 o'clock right now. I think we could have carried on for at least another hour or 2 hours. But I think this just sort of demonstrates the need that exists out there, being from all stakeholders, because I can see on the attendance list there have been many and various stakeholders attending this particular webinar. And it just emphasizes the need for us to communicate and to discuss and to talk and to share. Again, if I watch the chat box and all the comments in the questions and answers, there are many resources we can just share, just being just information or the actual training courses, etc. And I do want to thank those who have popped in the answers into the chat box. Thank you very much for those. We will certainly collate them. So from our side, we will certainly look at the unanswered questions. We will carefully scan the chat box to see if we cannot compile some sort of information document for everybody, just to at least have something at hand in terms of all the information being offered this morning. I really would like to thank our panelists. It has been a broad spectrum of views and opinions, and again, stakeholders and the needs. And I do like, Tsepu, what you've said. I think we're all singing from the same hymn page. It is just in what voice we are singing, being a tenor or a soprano or a second soprano. But I think we all do understand what the challenges are, but we also are getting a far better sense of what are the solutions. I'm going to give our panelists really just a half a minute, perhaps just to end off with your last views on the webinar this morning. Hussein, can we start with you?
Thanks, Suzanne. Half a minute. Thank you to everyone for the discussion. I wish all of my colleagues in the teaching profession all the best with this coding and robotics. It has the potential to change the world, but at the same time, we are going to be training people who are going to lead this technology change. And I think we need to think about both sides of this coin. Thanks.
Thank you, Hussein. Emma, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I think really every time I am part of one of these things, it highlights the immense importance of coming together and discussing. And certainly from my side, I find it incredibly energizing to be able to have the chance to discuss the issues with people who have the same end goal in mind. So really, thank you. And it does seem like there might be a call for another discussion.
Indeed, we will certainly be in touch. Jonathan, something, a last minute word from you, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Susan. I think we will only succeed once, in my mind, I was a child. It's a girl, the name is Koliswa from Brown's Farm. I've never met this child, but it's just someone that's living in my mind. If she can be a millionaire by the time she turns 18, then we have succeeded. It's all about the empowerment and making our kids globally relevant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Then once again, just thank you to my colleagues, Ina, Tsepu, for putting all this together and bringing this to the attention of all being participating in this webinar this morning. Colleagues, you have a nice day, and those who have the privilege to have a holiday today and the rest of the week, look after yourselves and stay healthy. Thank you very much.